Okay, the next thing I want to cover is the 1224 volt system on the Tier 4A flagship combine. Over here on the right, we have a couple of charging caps. We've got a red and a black, and this is where we would initially jump start the combine if it gets low on power. And let's see if we can come in here just a little bit closer so you can see. I don't know if you can make out this little decal here, but we have what's represented here as battery number 1 and battery number 2. And just think of battery number 1 being located closer to the cab. And since this combine operates primarily off of a 12 volt system, battery number 1 is our 12 volts that delivers power to the cab and most of our other circuits on the combine. However, with the introduction of the diesel exhaust fluid system on the combine, we have a second battery that is connected in series with the first, which provides us with 24 volts, because our diesel exhaust fluid system on the Tier 4A combine is a 24 volt system. Rumor has it that the Tier 4B will be back to, it'll be a 12 volt system, and in my opinion will be simplified. But yes, the operator's manual will tell you that if you have a dead battery, to take the batteries out of the case and then just charge them on the bench, or to charge the front battery, battery number 1, with these charging ports on the side. If you were sure that both batteries were discharged at the same rate or had the same amount of voltage in them, you could come up to the top side, and it's not easily seen from the ground, but up here on the top side you have a red post up here, and that is actually a 24 volt charging post. And so if you were to place a negative clamp on the black over here on the side and then put a positive 24 volts up on the top, you're going to charge both batteries at the same time. But beware if, for example, battery number 1 being your primary 12 volt system on the combine, if that was fully charged, or perhaps, yeah, if that was fully charged and number 2 was down, and you dump 24 volts on this combine and start charging, if one battery is completely charged and the other one's down, well, then you're going to cook the fully charged battery while you're bringing the other one up. So that's not necessarily the wisest thing to do either. So another workaround that none of the operator's manuals will show you is that you can charge the front battery 12 volts here on the right side, and then you can separate the system without taking the batteries out of the case. You can put a positive lead of your 12 volt charger up on top and a negative lead on the 12 volt connection on the right side. So if you have a negative lead here on the 12 volt and a positive lead on the 24 volt, you would essentially be charging battery number 2. Another tip that you might take away is, if you're trying to determine which battery is low, you can measure plus and minus on the side ports, and you'll be measuring the voltage of the front battery number 1. But if you take your negative lead of your voltmeter and place it on the top post here, the red post, and then place your positive lead on the 24 volt post up on the top side, that's going to give you the current charge level of battery number 2, which would be the rear battery. So you could charge them in that manner as well. If you just needed to charge the rear battery, negative clamp here, positive clamp on the 24 volt will get the job done. Sounds a little confusing. And I think that's why the operator's manuals refrain from even recommending this procedure, because nobody wants to be held liable if somebody doesn't completely understand what they're doing and blows up a battery. So just be careful when you're doing this. And I just want to disclaim as well, this is a tip that I've used that seems to work as I've followed the circuit and the wiring diagram. So don't do this procedure unless you know what you're doing. I'm just saying that for liability's sake, but it will work if you place 12 volts here, positive and negative on the black, or if you need to place 12 volts on the battery number 2, negative on this top post for our 12 volt post, and positive on the 24 volt post up top. Okay, so to further examine the 12 and 24 volt system on this combine, we can look at how these batteries are charged by the combine. The combine charges battery number 1 with the alternator on the engine. Battery number 2 is used primarily for the DEF system, and it's momentarily used during starting, but it puts these two batteries in series to give us 24 volts for the diesel exhaust fluid system. So yes, the alternator is the only component that charges battery number 1. Battery number 2 is charged by a small trickle charger that's mounted up underneath the grain tank. And when operational, you'll see a green light in the bottom right corner of that charger will be lit. If it's not on, we might look for a fuse blown up in the cab. But this trickle charger actually charges, it's a 24 volt trickle charger that charges battery number 2 and therefore also charging battery number 1 at 24 volts. So it brings these up evenly at a fairly slow rate, while the alternator is charging battery number 1 at a higher rate, depending on how much is needed. Of course, the alternator has a voltage regulator in it that controls that amount. But just remember that if battery number 2 goes dead and never does seem to recharge, we might be looking at an issue with blown fuse on the what the operator's manual will refer to as the battery equalizer. But in short, it's basically a 24 volt trickle charger. So if you think about it, if you leave a dome light on in the cab, you're most likely to run battery number 1 down. But if you're doing a lot of stop and start around the lot or the yard, battery number 2 is used, of course, for cranking in conjunction with battery number 1, but it charges at a slower rate. And so the alternator, of course, is not feeding this battery, just the trickle charger, which feeds both of them. So number 1 has not only the trickle charger charging it, but it also has the alternator charging it. And so battery number 2, since it is charged at a lower rate, may be prone to go dead if you're doing a lot of engine starts. But if you leave the dome light on or maybe operate the display without the engine running, then battery number 2 is going to be more prone to go down.